Hello and welcome to Next 2.0 on WQLN, PBS, NPR. Next is produced by the Public's Voice Media, hosted by Marcus Atkinson. If you want to know more about Next 2.0, you can go to Facebook and like the page, or you can follow us on Instagram at Next 2.0 Erie. There, you can keep up with upcoming promos, events, and clips about what's next for our community and our democracy. Thank you so much for being with us today. Marcus is actually not with us today. Instead, you've got me. I am Chuck Camerata, and a wonderful guest who is doing important, compassionate work. Her name is Monica Tornoe. Monica was born and raised in Guatemala, where she earned her law degree before dedicating her career to theological education, nonprofit work, and advocacy. She has worked in seminaries and organizations focused on women's empowerment and immigration justice, using storytelling as a powerful tool for awareness and change. She is also passionate about producing educational resources that foster critical thinking on social justice, empowerment, and immigration. She has published a couple of children's books and is currently working on a series highlighting the economic impact of immigrants and a children's story project on civil disobedience in the Bible. One of the most important things we do here at Next is to lift up people who are doing important and courageous work, trying to make our world a better place, and Monica is one of those people. So, welcome to the program, Monica.
Thank you, Chuck. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you here. And so as kind of a start to our time together, one of the things that I think is so important in life is to understand why people do the things that they do.
Mm-hmm.
So I often ask people to share their story as a way of entrancing a conversation. So I know that you and your husband are from Guatemala.
Yes.
So why did you come here?
Yes, that's a great question. The reasons why people migrate vary. Some are fleeing war, violence, or persecution, while others are seeking economic stability, education, or simply a higher quality of life. So the reason we personally migrated is because of economic opportunity. My husband wanted to explore other opportunities. He got a job offer. He was actually working for a company remotely, doing some work for them, and they offered him a job, and we applied for a visa, an H-1B visa. Those were very popular at the time. I think that they're not as popular anymore, but that is a great visa to come here, because that also allowed us to, after a certain period of time of living here, apply for a green card, and then for citizenship. So we had a legal path to become citizens here. So we were living a comfortable life in Guatemala. I was working as an attorney, and my husband got a good job, but still, how he was always interested in life here in the US, and he wanted to explore his options. So basically, we came for economic reasons and desired to explore other opportunities.
Kind of the same reason that my people came here 100 years ago.
Yes, exactly. And it's that's human nature, right? We want to explore our opportunities, and what's wrong with that?
Yeah. So once you were here, you've been here, what, 20 years, something like that?
Yes, 22 years, actually. Time flies. Can't believe it. Yeah. So I've almost been here longer than I've been in Guatemala. So, and it's an interesting situation because I don't feel like I go back to Guatemala and I don't feel like it's my place anymore, but also I don't feel like I belong here completely, so I don't feel like I don't belong anywhere, which is kind of like a sentiment that a lot of immigrants resonate with. We don't belong anywhere kind of thing. It's hard to be an immigrant, because you leave everything behind. You leave your traditions, your language, your culture, your food, and then you come back you come back to a new place, start a new life, and in so many ways you have to recreate yourself.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened to me. I had to rediscover who I was, recreate, and that's why so many immigrants that come here are very creative, you know, because we
Mm.
are forced into this creativity of who am I? What am I gonna do here? You know,
Yeah.
it's so different.
Yeah.
So it's a survival instinct, also this creativity and that we come with. And I've done so many creative things here that I don't think that I would have done back in Guatemala.
Mm. Yeah.
So that's been very interesting.
Yeah. I think that that's just kind of, I know you're a person of faith, and it's that story of traveling to a new place and building a new life. That's a very biblical kind of thing. The people of God in the Old Testament begin with Abram and Sarah being told to go to a new place, a thousand
Exactly.
miles away, and start a new life. And they too left a pretty comfortable life. So it's an age-old story. It's what
Exactly.
human beings do.
Migration is as old as humanity itself, you know, but we make it like it's only for modern times. You know, we
Yeah,
think of migration as like a recent migration, but we don't look back in history. We don't look back in biblical times and see how people were all the time moving.
yeah. It's the human condition, and
It's the human condition.
but
Yes,
most
exactly.
of us have limited perspective because we're just focused on our own lives and what's happening right here and right now. Uh, so it's good to have somebody like you come on and talk about these kinds of things to help people get a grip on a bigger picture of life.
Yes, exactly.
So I want to kind of turn now to talking a little bit about your
Mhm.
program.
Yes. Mhm. Undocumented stories.
Yeah, things have gotten difficult in the country for immigrants.
Ah,
Not that that's a new story either, but um, and so
yes,
in 2016 or so, when things began to get even tougher, you started this program called Undocumented Stories, correct?
exactly. Yes, that was
So tell us about it.
before. Sorry. So that was before Trump came into office on his first term. Um, he started, you know, with his campaign of threatening immigrants and being very hostile against immigrants. And of course, you know, I'm an immigrant myself. Um, we at that time had a, a green card, and where we could become U.S. citizens, but we didn't at the time until he started threatening immigrants. And then
Hmm.
he thought, you know, we need to, you know, get our papers together and, you know, and become citizens, you know. And so we started studying for the test and getting everything together, and we became U.S. citizens. And you know, it's funny because when you go in when you look at this, a lot of people thought the same thing. You know, like a lot of people that were like undecided, they want to be U.S. citizens. Everybody, you know, this is like everybody was scared.
Yeah.
And the people that had a path for citizenship, then they took it, right? And then they follow it and became U.S. citizens. But unfortunately, that was not the case for a lot of people. The majority of people of undocumented immigrants, they don't have a path for citizenship. And that's why a lot of people ask, why don't you come here legally? Why don't you, you know, get your paperwork together? And, you know, if, I mean, they would if they could. There's no path for citizenship for a lot of people. So people at that time were very, very scared. They didn't know what to do. And the thing about immigration status is that everybody is in a different status. It depends on how you came here, how long have you been here, if you have ties, you know, family ties that can make your secure your immigration status. So there's a lot of different components. So not one case is the same. So people were very afraid and asking a lot of questions. And as I was scared and I'm always been wanting to help my people, because when I moved here, I just became another immigrant, you know, here in the pool of immigrants. And I connected with other immigrants, and I started seeing their struggles. I started seeing
Mm.
the language barriers, the racism and discrimination that they faced. As I faced them myself, I had a lot more empathy for others. And I said, well, you know, I had it pretty easy in comparison. So I don't know how people do it. How do people survive here? I mean, I've heard so many stories, interacted with the community, and I was deeply concerned. So I started collecting stories. There were these legal clinics where people were wanting to know what kind of rights did they have when before Trump took office. And so I started attending these clinics and started connecting with people and just hearing their stories and gathering their stories. We had a little stand where we will just let people write their stories in paper, and and I with a promise that those stories will be displayed somewhere that people can read them. So that started as a one kind of thing, and I started collecting all the stories, and all of a sudden I had a lot of stories. I had more than 100 stories that I wanted to display, and we had this really big event, a storytelling event, sharing people's stories in a live storytelling event. Immigrants will share their stories in 10 minutes or so. And then alongside that, we also displayed those handwritten stories that we had collected. We displayed them outside of the event. So we had the live storytelling and also the kind of the written gallery of stories. And the event was powerful, and it was supposed to be a one time kind of a thing. But it was so much need for those stories to come out. We had and people from NPR, from the city, you had people from the community. We had a lot of people asking, what is this? I want to understand, I want to know. So it cannot be just one type of
Uh-oh.
event, it became an ongoing thing, and it was not what I had planned, but it became that. So the stories we collected became a traveling gallery. It has been
Yeah, I saw my wife and I saw the gallery in Pittsburgh and were just
interesting.
so moved by it. Some powerful, powerful narratives about people's lives and struggles.
Exactly. And so are the storytelling events, people started requesting those, and and so that's how Undocumented Stories was born. It was supposed to be a one-time event, but it became a program, and it has grown into different areas, and we have done many of those storytelling events in congregations, in youth groups. We've done it in organizations, even at homes. It's been very interesting how people want to hear those stories, because the thing about stories is that stories are powerful. Stories have the power to go straight to a listener's heart.
Mm,
um, they have the power to break down barriers and
yep,
stereotypes. And you cannot argue with a story.
that's right.
Story is a story. And so in a time where there's a lot of polarizations, you can't argue with someone's story. So
Yeah.
that's a powerful educational tool.
And knowing people's stories is the kind of connective tissue that we need in our culture.
Exactly.
I have a story that I tell people about an experience I had here. Erie's actually, we're a little city, but there's a lot of immigration here.
Uh-huh.
We have an international institute here that has been one of the best in the country. And so lots of people get resettled here.
Mhm.
And so I've gotten to know a lot of immigrants. Met a woman a few years ago, no names or anything, but she was from Iraq
Uh-huh.
and she was an angry human being. And she was in a group that I was involved with, and we were working together. And she just had this chip on her shoulder, and so I kind of kept my distance from her. But I was one
Mhm.
of the people who was a leader in this group, and
Mhm.
one of my co-leaders invited me to lunch one day. And
Mhm.
when I got there, this woman was there.
Oh.
My co-leader wanted me to connect and
Mhm.
understand, and she just turned to this woman and said, "Tell him your story."
Mhm.
And the story was that her husband, they were living in Iraq. She was a teacher. He was an educator as well. He had been dragged out of the house one day by a militia and shot in front of his family.
Wow.
And she and her two children had to escape. And they traveled across Iraq and into Jordan, maybe. I can't remember exactly what the journey was, but and then they ended up in a refugee camp in Jordan for several years before they got to the States. And I thought to myself, that paints a whole different picture than
Mhm.
I understand now where the chip on the shoulder comes from. I
Yeah.
see the humanity of this person. So stories are profound. But one of the problems with your program is that telling people's stories exposes them to a certain degree. And
Exactly.
that's a problem now, isn't it?
Exactly. When we do these storytelling events, we have immigrants that are vulnerable and they're courageous, with
Mm.
telling their stories. And I mean, it's been low risk, but it's some kind of risk involved, whenever they share their story. And I'm always concerned about them, but at this point we are in our society with our government, I cannot expose them anymore. It's more risky. I wouldn't want to do that. And
Yeah.
also, we've been doing this for almost for a decade now, and I feel like as time changes, it's also the moment to shift this program into another direction completely. Um, because I see that a concern that many Americans have is more than anything is the economy, right? And it's probably the reason why a lot of folks voted the way they did.
Mhm.
And so I think that if we can show folks, that really at the backbone of the American economy are immigrants. So
Mm.
we can focus on the economic part of it and and exclusively and show them, this is what deportation will look like.
Yeah.
And it will not only affect immigrants, it will affect a whole economy, it will affect us all.
Yeah.
And when people perceive that they're going to be personally affected, it changes things, right?
It
Because
does.
they don't see that connection. It's hard to, I think we're in a hard time to teach people about compassion.
Mm.
I don't know. I've been trying to do that, and I don't know if I'm successful with it. But when people connect what is happening with the personal, it changes things. Then because then they're concerned about what's going to happen to them because they think it has nothing to do with them. Immigration is not my problem. It's
Mm.
somebody else's problem that came illegally here, and they have to figure it out themselves. But when you focus on the economy part and you see how their contributions are tremendous in our economy and they're essential to our economy and how they will have an impact in your personal life, it changes things. Um, when
So
we,
you're developing a curriculum now?
yes, so what I'm doing now is like alongside, collecting stories, I'm collecting stories, but different kinds of stories. So
Mm.
these are not the stories of immigrants, but these are the stories of business owners, of people that work in the industry that they rely on immigrants.
Hmm.
These are farmers who rely on immigrants' work. Um, because if there's no, we wouldn't have produce and we wouldn't have food on our tables if it wasn't for immigrants' hard work. And so we wouldn't have the dairy industry relies 99% on immigrant workers.
Mm.
We have construction businesses,
Yeah.
childcare, we have healthcare, we have so we want all these good things that immigrant provides for our economy, but we're not seeing how it connects in a personal instance with us. But if we say, like, well, forget your strawberries, you won't have strawberries, you won't have your berries, you won't have your milk, you won't have your, you won't have this on your table. Or if you do, it will be very pricey because somebody else will do this work, not for the low wages that immigrants do it.
Yeah. I had an experience this week with um, a contractor who has is doing some work around town and had a crew that was mostly Mexicans, young Mexican men who worked their buns off, but were not. Several of them were not documented, and he said, "I have never hired people who work harder than these guys."
Mhm.
And so this grizzled old construction guy um, is embracing these immigrants. So part of the work that you need to do, that you're trying to do now, is to dispel the crazy misinformation, the false narrative out there that immigrants are a drain on the economy, when in fact they're a boon to the economy. And we know that here in Erie because we've got so many immigrants doing so many important things that have contributed powerfully to our economy in this little town.
Exactly. So
So,
I would advise, consumers like keep your eyes open, for these changes,
yeah,
because it will directly affect your pockets. It will directly affect the economy. Check out the grocery stores, prices going up, and see how products and items are more scarce or
yeah,
prices going up, because this is going to affect you personally, even though you don't think it will.
yeah. Um, so when we talked a week or so ago, you talked about this educational component that you're going to begin initiating. And but you also talked about the possibility of encouraging some civil disobedience amongst the rest of us. What is that going to look like, or is it looking like?
Well, I think that one of the greatest things about this country is their following their laws and the regulations, but it's also at the same time the downfall, because we don't see people anymore. We only see
Hmm,
rules and regulations, and um, and that's problematic when you don't see people anymore. And so rules of course, have are important in society, but people are more important. So
hmm,
we have stopped looking at people.
yeah,
And when rules take the first place and it's all about rules and one more rule and one more regulation, even if it's unjust, because rules can be unjust, laws can be
absolutely.
unjust, and we have seen this throughout history. We kind of like don't make that connection, and this is what I'm getting at, because we only see rules, and even if they're unjust, and we have, throughout history we see how authoritarian governments get away with rules, and
Hmm,
that doesn't mean it's right. Jesus challenged the status quo. Jesus challenged the leaders, the Pharisees, and they were only focusing on the law. They were not seeing people. And it's the same here. It was the same with the Nazis.
hmm,
Everything they did was legal, and and then we have this genocides happen,
yeah,
and then we have these unjust things happen. Slavery was legal
yep,
here in the U.S. So you have to realize that the laws can be unjust,
hmm,
and when that happens, as people of faith, we follow a God whose name is Elohim Misfat. His
yeah,
name is justice. So we cannot blindly follow a law that it goes against
yeah,
God's law. God's law comes first. And God is a God of justice.
hmm,
So we seek God first, we seek justice first, and then the rest. Of course, when you break human laws, what happens is you suffer consequences, right?
hmm,
And and it's hard to teach how to be civil disobedience, right? How to break laws, when all you've heard is like the right thing to do is to follow the law. So
yeah,
how do you teach them? So I started looking into the Bible because we have a lot of cases of civil disobedience in the Bible,
hmm,
and we don't talk about these things, and this is one of the things that bothers me, like I was telling you, with the book, The Holy Stranger, that tells the story of Jesus as an immigrant, and we don't see Jesus as an immigrant. It's kind of like we skip that part, but
hmm,
if we focus, that our Lord and Savior was himself an immigrant, like many other Bible characters have been immigrants in the Bible, but our very own Lord and Savior who was an immigrant, and then it changes the narrative. It should change the narrative that being hostile
hmm,
towards immigrants.
yeah,
So, going back to the Bible, there's a lot of cases of civil disobedience, and I've been working on those, focusing on those stories, and wanting to bring to life five of those stories. And I am focusing right now on this part of doing it for children, because I think it's key to teach children, we neglect children, and we don't focus enough on how smart they are, how open they are to
Mhm.
receive, much more so than adults.
Yeah.
And also when we teach children, we are teaching, adults in a way, right? Because, adults read those stories to children. But it's stories of civil disobedience. We have the stories of the midwives in the time of
Mm.
Moses, that
Yeah.
when Pharaoh orders the midwives to kill all the babies, um, all the Hebrew babies, because they were going up in number.
Mm.
So it's always out of fear. It's always out of fear of changes, fear of losing power, right? It's the fear
Yeah.
that I'm driving all this narrative, right? All
Yeah.
this hateful, harmful rhetoric. It's the fear of change. But we also serve a God who brings change into our life all the time. There cannot be transformation without change.
Yeah.
So we are resistant and fearful of change. Well, change is unavoidable, necessary, and it also is part of transformation. So that's behind, what really happens when these kinds of things of harmful and hateful things come to life, is the fear. Like when
Yeah.
Herod wants to find Jesus and kill him, he's threatened by this nuking. I mean,
Yeah.
he's gonna take over. What is gonna happen to my power? And you know, so it's always that's right. But if we start looking at these kind of stories, and we start learning how to be disobedient, because
Yeah.
we start focusing and developing also that discernment and that critical thinking that is so much needed,
Mm.
of how can we distinguish a law that is unjust versus a law that is just, and how do we break those? Because we have to. With
Yeah.
authoritarian governments, there is no way, no way. I mean, you have to break the law.
Absolutely. There's not only a great biblical tradition, and I ask people this all the time in the church, because people in the church don't quite get this.
Uh-huh.
Why did they kill Jesus? Because he was speaking in anti-establishment kind of ways. He was speaking against an unjust system, both religiously and politically, a system that oppressed people and damaged people. And he was all about doing things that were life-giving, that were bringing, developing compassion in people. You were talking about trying to teach compassion, and you're right, by the way, that you have to start that with kids, and which is why I read your the book about the dog.
Uh-huh.
And so for our listeners, Monica's written a couple of children's books that we will note in our show notes, so that if you're looking for those, you can get those.
Mhm.
But teaching compassion from an early age is critical.
Critical.
That's what Jesus wanted us to do. What's
Mhm.
most important in life? Jesus said, love God, love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's it. That summarizes the
Exactly.
whole of the Bible.
And I think that we make it seem like loving is being, I mean, nice, and not being disruptive, and not being angry, and all this negative. It's like, oh, let's push them aside and let's be superficially nice. But loving somebody is very hard. It's a hard thing to do, because loving requires us to know a person, right? Loving us requires to give more of ourselves. And loving is a hard thing to do. So it is the greatest commandment. So it must not be easy, So we make it easy and superficial. It's like that is not from God. So it involves compassion. It involves a lot of things that will take from us. It involves a lot of giving, and we need to teach that. We need to teach what that is. And I think that early on, like you said, teaching kids
Yeah.
compassion and also understanding others is critical, because we cannot love people if we don't understand them, if we don't know them, we don't understand them, we don't have compassion for us. There's no love.
Yeah.
It can't be.
Yeah. So connecting with people, understanding people is a huge aspect of what we need to be teaching people in our churches and in our society. And I want to get a little bit specific about some of that,
Yeah.
to help people understand. folks who have immigrated. My previous podcast was called Why, and probably because I never outgrew that stage of childhood where you're always asking the why questions. And so I have some why questions that might be instructive for those who are listening. And we've answered some of these questions already, but one that we haven't really hit on specifically that I'd like to ask is why don't immigrants come here legally?
And like we talked about, people come here for very different reasons, and we cannot put them in like a one size fits all
Mm,
kind of thing. Um, there are many reasons that people come here, like we talked about, economic, fleeing, and war. Um, and so a lot of people would come here legally if they could, but there is no path for citizenship.
mm,
Um, like what is happening right now in the world, and what the world is seeing that is happening in the US, for example, is prompting responses from a lot of countries. And let me
mm,
give you an example. When they're seeing what a lot of countries are doing is they're opening their borders to Americans and said, come and move here. If you're not satisfied with what's going on in your country, come and move here. We give you visas, we give you this. People are opening their doors to Americans. Okay, come here, come and live here, move. So it's very interesting that they're inviting Americans to move abroad.
mm,
And we give you visas, we give you this. Canada is also branding themselves like, we give you free healthcare. Come and move here to Canada. And all the benefits, it's a free education, free healthcare. Those are very appealing, aren't they?
mhm.
And people, so they're opening their borders, their doors. But what's happening in the US is that it has been closing the doors. So there is no way for people to do this legally.
Yeah,
So there's people come here escaping poverty and escaping violence, and some of those, or many of those, I should say, conditions have been created, ironically, by the
uh,
same U.S. government,
yeah,
and they have caused all this violence by supporting this military groups. Um, like, for example, in El Salvador and Guatemala, they supported all this military, and the result was this disastrous. There was even a time in El Salvador that they supported, I think it was $1 million a day during the 80s, a
mm,
$1 million a day, just supporting these groups, combating anti
yeah,
Soviet, what they call, othering, groups, right, as part of the communist groups. And that's a lot of money, and there were a
mm,
lot of people killed in those. And so what El Salvador was left behind was, a disaster.
yeah,
The aftermath was a disaster. So people, of course, had nothing. There was people were poor. People have experienced this horrible violence, and people have nothing. So what is the next human thing to do, right? When
yeah,
you have nothing, I mean, of course you will move. Of course you will move, whatever it takes. I'm asking you, Chuck. Wouldn't you move? Wouldn't you move with your family if you have nothing left? I
yeah,
think it's the natural response, that we will all move. So if there was a path, for doing this legally, believe me, people will be the first ones to do it. But unfortunately, there is no path, and people come sometimes desperate, or many times desperate, and they come and they simply cross. It is simply cross because desperation is a hard thing.
yeah,
When you're starving, or when you're persecuted, or you're suffering this great violence in your hometown, because, to be honest, nobody wants to leave. Nobody
yeah,
wants to leave. People, I mean, it's a hard thing to move. It's not an easy thing. So people are doing already a hard thing.
right. And when you're desperate, you're less concerned about the legal niceties of immigration than you are with getting to a safer place and
exactly,
a place where you can provide for your family. So
exactly.
one of the reasons that they come illegally, there are limits on legal immigration, but one of the reasons they come is that America is the land of opportunity. At least we have been, and they're escaping from a desperate situation.
Yes. And don't you blame, America has been is the land known as the land of opportunity and has been branded as the land of opportunity for years.
Hmm.
People is what they see of America is opportunity, equal to opportunity, right? So wouldn't you want to go to this place where there's opportunity for you and your family
Right,
to start all over? I mean, it's
right.
like I don't blame anybody. I mean, I would do it if I was really desperate. I will do it illegally. I would do it.
Yeah,
Because you will do anything for your family. But,
exactly. And
let me give you an example of how unfair it is to come here, um, depending on who you are, and also that's the bias, the unjust of the system, because Ukrainians, for example, what
yeah,
happened with the Ukrainian war, the United States opened the door for Ukrainians, and they gave them immediately. They welcomed them. They opened the doors. They provided a path for them. So I mean, good for them. I'm glad that we could support them, and I'm glad they did. But in stark contrast, we see our Mexican neighbors and our immigrant neighbors from Latin America. There's no path. Let's
why do
close.
you think that is?
And however you want to call this, you can label it. You can say a lot of things about this, but what is really at the core of this is race.
Absolutely right.
Is
You,
race.
you're trying to be nice about it. I would just boldly say that it was because the Ukrainians, it is because
Yes,
Ukrainians are white.
exactly. So
And that makes it more acceptable to the
exactly.
white power structure here
Yeah.
in this country.
Yeah.
And
So
people don't like to hear that, but the idea that racism is dead in the United States is just foolishness.
no,
And
it
that's what this new regime uh, in American politics is trying to, and they're even saying it now that they think white men should be in charge, and
Mhm.
that's scares the hell out of me, and I'm a white man.
Exactly. And this slogan that, let's make America great again. What does great again means?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great again to what time? To
Yeah,
slavery?
yeah,
Was that a great time? Are you talking about being in control and oppressing people, enslaving people? Is that great again?
yeah.
Is what I'm asking, because it's obviously has everything has to do with race. And at the core of the matter, when you trace it back, it's race. I would like to find another explanation, but every time these conflicts arise, it's about race. It's very simple that Ukrainians were open the doors because of their skin color, and people from Mexico and Latin American countries, we close the door on them because of their skin color. That's it.
Yeah.
There's
and
no other explanation.
and one of the things that happened early on in the first Trump administration was that the Muslim ban, and so it wasn't just about race in some ways, although most of the Muslims they were banning were from places where they would be people of color, but just things and people we don't understand. And so we have the same issues in this country, not with people of color, but also with uh, people in the queer community, LGBTQ people. And we don't, we're just so bad at connecting. It's why I loved your program from the start, the Undocumented Stories. We're so bad at connecting with people who are different from us and not
Exactly.
seeing that our common humanity is the thing that we need to see as a first. And you and I would I think agree on this, that when we talk about this from the perspective of faith, we would, I think theologically, we would say, and I know you're a theological seminary person, um, we would say all of us have been created in the image of God. And so there's that divine image in each one of us, but we don't see that in people who are different from us. And so starting with children, being able to teach people to see that in others is a place that I think we need to start. And my frustration, one of the things that just makes me so sad and so disappointed, is that we're not doing that in our churches nearly enough. And so we have churches who are villainizing and demonizing people who are different when they're children of God just as much as we are.
Yeah, the frustration with church is like, yeah, I am there with you. And it also is upsetting that, we don't talk about these hard things in church.
No.
I hardly hear this from the pulpit. The it's easy to avoid it and not talk about it, and it's very problematic to me that we're not talking about this from the pulpit because we don't want to offend anybody.
Right.
And but the gospel is offensive. Jesus was offensive.
They killed him.
Jesus was political. So we don't want to talk about politics. When do we get here that
Yeah,
we're not supposed to talk about politics? We
yeah,
need to talk politics.
absolutely right.
That's important,
Yeah,
super important. That we, how come we're not talking? It's like sweeping under the rug, and that's not gonna go away.
right.
It's like we need to be talking politics.
Yeah,
We need to get involved in politics. We need to be preaching from the pulpit. And who cares if we're offending people?
exactly.
But the truth is offensive, Chuck.
Yeah,
The Jesus was offensive, so why are we worried about offending others?
yeah,
That doesn't mean hating. And people don't know how to balance this. Like everything is black and white, and also
yeah,
I think that is also a problem with us. We are not. Life is not black and white, so we cannot be extremes. Extremist is very dangerous place
yeah,
wherever you are. So I think that we need to remember that life is not black and white, and be calling and othering people like the good versus bad, black versus white. It's like we cannot do that. We
yeah,
need to find a common thread. Like we're all human beings and
yeah,
we all want the same things. The
yeah,
great thing about the stories is that when you listen to the stories, it reminds us that we're all human beings and we all want the same things.
yes,
We think that, oh, why do people come here? Like, oh, for a better life. Well, let me ask you, wouldn't you come to another place for a better life? Of course you would. I have this example in Texas, for example. There's speculation that we're eventually going to run out of water. What will happen if we do run out of water? Would people move? Of course they will move, because without water, there's no life, right? So people
right.
will move where there is life, and that's as simple as that. We
Yep.
will all move. We see it in nature. I mean, and we also are amazed at how birds or butterflies migrate. And it's a wonderful thing. And we praise nature for migrating.
Hmm.
But when it comes to human beings, it's another thing. We don't um we don't think it's wonderful if people migrate,
Yeah,
and so it's all connected. Nature is connected. We human beings will migrate if all these climate changes come our way, we will migrate.
absolutely.
So we are forced to into it. It's something
Yeah,
that of course we will follow wherever life is. We will follow that. It's a natural response.
yep. It's just it is the human response to the way the world is and to the need to sustain ourselves and to find the best place to be. And um, in fact, if you think about the Gospels, I think one of the key teachings of Jesus was he talked a lot about building the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is like, and that kingdom that he describes, that's part of what scared the powers that be, because
Uh-huh.
he was talking about a kingdom that didn't necessarily preserve their power and control, but was more inclusive. It was
Exactly.
political in ways that are not particularly about policy, but are about an attitude towards other people that can get put into policy and needs to be put into policy because of human frailty, but it was an expansive and a big understanding of the way that society needs to be in order to reflect the God of love. And so it's inherently political. If you're going to build a culture based on God's love, you have to be able to do it politically.
Yeah, exactly. And
Yeah,
we tend to focus a lot. We emphasize so much on our differences. What makes us different? Our languages, our tradition, our borders, our skin color, our upbringing, you know. But when in reality, we share more than we might realize.
yeah,
So no matter where we come from, we all long for the same things, for security, for love, for opportunity, for a
yeah,
sense of belonging. So migration is not an anomaly or an exception. It's a natural response to the fundamental human instinct to
yeah,
seek a better life. So it's not about
absolutely.
wanting to take from others, because a lot of people are concerned about that. Oh, they're going to come on and steal our jobs. They're going to exploit the systems. You know, it's not about wanting to take from others, but it's about the same drive that has built nations,
Yeah.
enriched cultures, and shaped history. So what I think migration is at its core is simply a movement of hope.
Mm,
People move because of hope. You know,
mm,
hope that when we are in this place, we will find what we're looking for.
yeah, I love that. That's a great way to think about it. And I think that at root, we've become, and maybe this is just the human condition, and it has been for millennia, but we've become all about protecting our little sphere
Mhm.
rather than asking ourselves, what's the best way for the most people to live well? And so as people come to us, how do
Uh-huh.
we how do we build a better country, a better society, uh,
Exactly.
and celebrate what people bring?
That
And
is,
I think we just need to change the story, change the paradigm that we're living in.
we need to have a more of abundance mentality, because we have
Yes.
scarcity mentality. We think that, oh, they're gonna come and take from us. There's not enough for everybody. But you know, Gandhi had a great quote. He said, "There is enough in the world for everybody's need, but not for everybody's greed."
Mm,
And don't you agree with that? You know, because we live in a world that there's plenty of resources, plenty of space for everybody.
yeah.
So we have to see the world more with an abundant mentality than a scarcity that I'm going to be lacking. It's like, no,
Yeah.
you're not going to be lacking. You know, it's like same with justice. You know, justice, equity is not pie. You know, it's like, oh, if we give to people, then we're gonna be without. No, it's not like that.
Yeah.
It's not like
We
that.
talk about it as it's not a zero-sum game.
Exactly.
It's not if I live in your area, I'm going to take from you. It's not like that. It's about how we together are better.
Exactly.
And I think that meant, I don't know how we teach that to people, but that's a direction that I try to take my work here in this
Um,
place.
You know, I mean, I think that also when we focus on the contributions that, you know, immigrants bring to this country, when we focus strictly on economic contributions, you know, it can make us expand our mind and say, oh, these people are not even taking from us.
Yeah.
I don't think people realize that being an undocumented immigrant is not having a social security number.
Yeah.
How can you exploit the system without a social security number?
Yeah.
You have no social security number. You have no driver's license. In the majority of states, you cannot apply for a driver's license because you need a social security number for it.
Hmm.
And the states that you do have it, it has a little mark on that, you know, that makes you different from other driver's license. So it's not even an equal driver's license.
Mm-hmm.
And you imagine living in a country that operates by systems not having a social security? You cannot do anything. It's like
Yeah.
it's a struggle to do everything. You don't have healthcare. You don't have you cannot apply for as insurance. You cannot even rent a home. I mean, it's all these hurdles that you face, and people are exploited because of this.
Yeah.
People are exploited, they're threatened, and it's horrible. Lawyers exploit their clients, they lie to their clients, they take their money. They people cannot even rent, or they rent at a higher rates than others, because you have limited options.
Right.
So how are you getting your work you're providing for the economy, doing all this hard work, but how are you getting it back? You get no benefits. If you have no social security number, you will never
Yeah.
get benefits.
So
So how is that exploiting it?
the idea that immigrants are draining our systems financially is just wrong,
It's a
because they're
lie.
not part of the system.
It's
So
a
they don't
lie.
get
It's a lie. Oh,
benefits.
but let me tell you something else. So immigrants pay taxes. Immigrants pay taxes, so the contribution goes beyond, their
Yep.
hard work. They also pay taxes, but they will
Yep.
never see those taxes back to them.
Right.
Chuck, it goes as it's as bad that they don't even report crime
Yeah.
sometimes, because they're terrified of police. They're terrified. Sometimes they don't even go to the hospitals when they need to. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just a hard place to be.
It is. It is. It's the same thing with the foolish idea that we're only getting criminals from other countries, violent criminals, especially the the folks who are undocumented, who I have known. The last thing in the world they want is to draw attention to themselves.
Exactly.
So they are not going to be involved in criminal things, because they need to stay anonymous and under the radar. So, and all of the statistics support the fact that they commit crimes at a far lower rate than American citizens themselves do. So it's foolishness, but it's what power structures do to hold on to their power, and that's kind of where we're at this point. And I don't. So you said that we should be operating out of a sense of abundance, and there are abundant resources out there, and Gandhi and others were right that there's plenty of wealth out there. The problem, that as I see it at this point, the reason that we're operating out of a mentality of scarcity rather than abundance, is that there are a few people, a few families that are hoarding huge amounts of the resources. And the whole thing with Trump and Musk and the current administration is that they're seeking to hoard even more. Now they want more of yours. You're barely surviving, and they want to take more from you so that they can have more. A guy who is going to be worth $1 trillion in a few years doesn't need more. But we have this, we let them get away with that because the idea of scarcity, of more, is so fundamental to the narrative that we have been telling ourselves all these years. You got to have more. You got to have more. And it's destructive. It's killing the environment. It's killing our relationships. It's killing our country.
It's killing our country. It's killing our economy, and an economy that everybody cares about, And they elected the current administration because they thought they were going to be it was going to be better for the economy, right? And we see that the economy is not going to do well with all the changes that they're implementing, with all the greed that you see with this group of billionaires. That I mean, how can they're only caring about their well-being? They don't care about the well-being of Americans, of society in general.
No,
And
only themselves.
only themselves. So then, if we talk about what Gandhi says, like, there definitely is not enough for people's greed. There is definitely not enough for people's greed in the world. And that's why they want to go to Mars.
I would like to send them there.
Yeah, on a one-way ticket. Don't come back.
Yeah.
You know, we've been given this world by God, and we need to be
Mm,
good stewards of what we've been given, and we've been given all this beautiful nature that we've done a poor job of protecting of the environment. We've done poorly with caring for others and loving others. And we're at a point that is a lot of self and the capitalistic mentality is what can I take from you? It's not what can I do for you? How can I help you? Um, how can we don't have the community mentality that if you're good, I'm good. We
yeah,
don't have that. We are in competition with one another and trying to bring one down. Well, it's unsustainable to think of community like that. It
yeah,
doesn't work like that.
yeah,
Communities that thrives are the ones that look after one another and encourage and help one another. um, and we don't we're seeing destructive all of what we're seeing right now are destructive patterns of scarcity of the us versus them mentality,
yes.
which is such a the low form of mentality, and is scarce and is scary and is not godly.
No.
How can we think that God is with that? God is not aligned with anything of what is happening right now. So we need to revisit, our way of thinking, because if we're blindly following the rules that are created by this administration, we're not comparing them to God's way of doing things, to
Right.
God's character. I mean, we're lost. We have lost our way.
Yeah. In fact, we're not only not comparing them or evaluating those ways of thinking in relation to what God would have us, what Jesus taught us. We have developed in so many ways in our churches a narrative that accepts the status quo. And I know you and I both are kind of on this particular page where we'd like to see the church be a counterculture force for community by building community ourselves. And that's one of the focuses of my work is to try to help small groups of us to build community in churches and in other faith groups that will be a model for the world to see. This is how it can be. It doesn't have to be us against them. It doesn't have to be constant threat, constant fear. That's what the people in power want us to think, but it doesn't have to be that. There's so much more to the good life when we are doing it together and
Exactly.
sharing our resources.
Yeah.
But
And
that's a
there's a lot.
narrative that's not out there right now.
No, but we have to be counter narrative, and this is very important. Counter narrative is like the civil disobedience is very important, um, and because we have to question everything, we cannot simply accept anything. We're in the age of misinformation, and we know that. But still, we will be satisfied with a leader saying anything. We cannot a leader we cannot blindly follow a leader because leaders are human beings and we all can
Yeah,
fail. And
yeah.
so we need to compare everything that is happening in light of God's word.
Mm.
And also, but for that we also need discernment, we need to know God's character. And I think that something that I see that is problematic is that we don't know God's character. Because if we read our Bibles, if we learn scripture, but we don't know who God is and what his character is, and that is key. Because if we don't know who God is, then we won't know where to find him. We won't know what is of God and what is not of God. And because that spirit will give us that discernment. It's very clear when you see these policies, when we see the rhetoric, this is not from God. No
Yeah,
matter you can be swearing, you can be using God's word, twisting God's word, talking about God, but you know that this person is not a person of God, because you can see their actions, they're not
yeah,
matching with God characters. So we simply, if we don't know like where to start, like simply question, um, a person's character with God's character
Yeah.
and see if they're in line. It is very simple. Like I said, God is a God of justice. And so God cares deeply about justice. So let's not think that God doesn't care about justice, because he does. His name is justice. So he is, when Jesus flips the table, he's flipping tables of oppression. He is very upset about injustices and people exploiting people. Of course, he will be against slavery, against all these abuses that are happening, about discrimination and racism and othering people. Of course, he's against all of that. So we cannot expect to be following rules and laws and then thinking that we're following God, because God is not there. God is not there, and he's not there. So I think critical thinking, discernment, and knowing God's character are essential in the times that we're living in. And also we follow a God, and we need to follow him first and his laws first, before any of a man's laws that can be flawed and have been flawed and are unjust. And we that's why civil disobedience becomes very important right now. And so we need to think how to be civil disobedient.
Absolutely. So I could talk to you for hours. I think you and I are kind of on the same wavelength in many ways. And I hope to, maybe you could come to my kids' coffee shop here in Erie sometime.
I would love to.
Although it would be much more likely that I would come to Austin, where it's nice. What's it like there today? Because here it's like 12 degrees.
Well, here is 30 degrees, I think.
Oh, you poor people. 30 degrees.
But I mean, it's very cold for here. So
we would kill for 35 degrees right now in here in Pennsylvania. Anyway, I would love to continue our conversation, and I'll be in touch. But let me just bring it to a close with this. St. Augustine, 1700 years ago, wrote about how people understand the Bible. And one of the things he said is that there's a lot of ways to think about it. There's a lot of ways to interpret it. And people said, well, how do you know? What's a good interpretation? And Augustine said, any interpretation that fosters love and compassion is a good one. And any interpretation that does not is out of sync with the God of the Bible. And I think that's the starting place. And you and I are on that same page. And we need to continue to promote that in the church and do our best to be models of that in the world around us. I very much appreciate the work that you do. I'm very moved by Undocumented Stories. Look forward to the work that you're continuing to do. And we will promote your books and your project on our website, and hope that we have opportunity to connect more in the future. Thank you so much for being on the program today, Monica. It was a delight for me.
Oh, it was a delight for me too, Chuck. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Was our interview with Monica Tornoe. If you are interested in Monica's work with Undocumented Stories or her children's books, check out the show notes accompanying this episode, and we will see you next time on Next 2.0 as we talk about what is next for our community and our democracy.